So, hi, Lynda Harwood. Welcome to the interview.
Hello, how are you?
I'm really well, thank you. So well, busy at this time of year, but so excited to get back in touch with you. Thank you for making time for this conversation. So, just to set it up for people, you attended the Major Gifts Mastery Program last year, and you've agreed to come on the call to talk about some of the things you've been doing because you've been getting some fabulous results. You told me the other day, and in some interesting ways. And I thought it would be really useful if people could hear some of the key ideas you took from that course and how they've helped you. But just before we get on to that, I know I worked with you when you worked at a previous charity. I think you were at Guide Dogs, but now you're at Animals Asia and your role is major
Uh,
fundraiser.
Major Gifts Manager at Animals Asia. Yeah.
Yeah, so my first question, Lynda, is what drew you to come onto the Major Gifts Mastery Program in the first place?
My background was always corporate fundraising and innovation fundraising. And when I got the job at Animals Asia, completely brand new to Major Gifts fundraising, and my manager offered me the chance to attend your course. So couldn't turn it down.
Fabulous. So you already had experience in fundraising, but now this was a new specific focus in high value. And I guess my question is, there are many elements to this program. There's training and there's coaching and there's access to online webinars and so on through the club. What were the elements that you found particularly helpful, or was it just the combination?
It was a combination of everything, but I do really think the peer-to-peer support was invaluable. I mean, it's now 15 months since I completed the course, and I'm still in touch with a group, a really core group of people who are now friends. We meet up often in London, we share experiences, and that's been invaluable. But also for me, I would say the coaching calls. So I had my coaching calls with Charlie, and I was completely brand new to Major Gift fundraising. It really just helped me consolidate my learning. So yeah, I would say the peer-to-peer group, the webinar, as well as coaching calls were really useful for me.
Yeah, that's what many people say, that the power of a group, it makes such a difference. That helps you keep taking the actions that you sort of think you should do, but because you're encouraged and other people are doing it too, that makes all the difference. I guess I've got one question in terms of results. I don't know where you're at now, but when I bumped into you a couple of months ago, I was so happy for you because you're doing ever so well. Top line, how has your year been going this year in financial terms? And then after that, I'd love to drill down a little into some specific tactics you've been using.
Yeah, so my budget for this year was 595,000, and we're just finishing up for Christmas, and I will be bringing in about £900,000 this year, which is amazing.
Huge congratulations. That's really takes some doing, Lynda. And I guess a key thing the viewers would be curious about is that wasn't just one big gift, it was one piece of luck. I sense there's a confidence and a momentum about how you go about your job, and you were kind enough the other day to say that some of those key things were things you've practiced ever since the mastery program. So in terms of the content, either you got from Charlie the coach or from me in the training days, do you want to start with one of the key ideas that you feel you've got more successful at that's helped with those results?
I think first and foremost, it's all about knowing your donor, and I learned that from day one on the course. And I don't mean just from a fundraising perspective to be able to match them to a specific project. I mean knowing them personally as well, and really sort of appreciating and understanding their world. Because it just brings that personable relationship. It's not a transactional relationship. You're able to connect with them and keep that relationship going. And, it could be anything from having something in common, such as running or a local football team. But for me, I really made sure this year I know everything about my donors. I know their children, I know when their birthdays are. I'll check up if I know they've been on holiday, I'll drop them a little note, see how their holidays have been. And I think it's also really about building that relationship and making them feel valued and valuable. So if I have anything like that I need some advice on, maybe we're looking at setting up a new fundraising project, I will go to them for feedback and just make sure that they know they're really part of the Animals Asia family. Um, and I suppose something else that I learned really early on was that people absolutely buy feelings and identity. And I think that's something that we do so well at Animals Asia. We have this real family element. And I remember one of the things you said to me was, when you have your business cards, why don't you get a picture of your favourite bear on it? It's a good talking point. It makes it more personal to the donor. They've got a connection. And I did. I went away and did that. And I picked my little favourite bear, who's a sun bear called Anne Marie, and she's on my business card. And again, whenever I hand out my business card, I introduce myself and Anne Marie as well. And it really does bring that relationship. Um, and I think one of the other things that makes me laugh is because I came from this sort of corporate fundraising, suited and booted world, I was very much, very professional and very much, yours sincerely and best wishes. And when I joined Animals Asia, they encouraged me. They said, this is a family. And, we want you to sign off with, bear hugs. Bear hugs, we are a family. And at the start, I thought, oh God, I'm not used to this. This isn't what I'm used to at all. And I kid you not, Rob, within a couple of days, bear hugs, it just felt so natural. And that's just the ethos of the charity. And it feels weird now not to sign off bear hugs.
Mm. Yeah, and certainly I've worked with several of your colleagues, and that's a key theme I've always got, that this family ethos comes through really strongly and authentically in your culture. And surprise, surprise, that makes it easier for you to be more informal and personal in the way you communicate to your supporters. So surprise, surprise, those relationships do become more warm and natural. So
yeah.
I love that. In terms of is there a particular gift or particular supporter journey you can think of that is an example of you working more in this way?
Yeah, and I think it leads on to something else that I learned at your training course, which was never underestimate lapsed donors, or actually never underestimate a stewardship meeting either. And the example I'd like to give is a donor who, before my time, probably about 2015, gave a very large gift and said, that's it, that's my final gift to Animals Asia, thank you very much, which is absolutely fine. But I kept the stewardship going. Any little information that was happening, I would send it her way, kept her in touch, even if it's just simple things like newsletters or a little bit of insider information. And she got back in touch in the summer and said, look, I've been reading what you've been doing. I actually now want to give one final gift this time. And we spoke about it over the summer, discussed, how much she wanted to give, why, where to. And I'm very pleased to say that she ended up giving a £100,000 gift to us, which was just incredible. So never, ever underestimate lapsed donors.
That's wonderful and so generous. Congratulations in just doing those small things right. So we've covered two or three themes so far. Is there another particular idea or theme or example that springs to mind from your last few months of success that brings it to life?
Yeah, there's a couple. One of the ones I wanted to mention was also about connecting frontline staff with our donors. And it's a little bit tricky for us because our work is in Asia and we're obviously based in the UK, so I can't often take people to the programme sites. But after talking it through in the course, I did a few things to really bring our programmes to life. So I set up WhatsApp groups with people, with donors and the frontline staff. I set up a webinar this year with our director of the Bear Sanctuary in Vietnam for our mids and major donors, and that was incredible. It gave people the real inside scoop. They were able to speak face to face with the director, but they were also able to ask their questions as well. So it was used more of a stewardship tool rather than fundraising, but it was so successful. I'm going to run another 4 next year, 1 per quarter. And I also had my first VIP trip this year. So we took 5 donors to Vietnam and China, and I was luckily able to go as well. And that was really bringing the donors face to face with our work.
At some level, just being able to connect people to the experience, to the work itself, does its job, doesn't it? But if you were to tell me a couple of things you specifically tried hard to do on before that trip or on that trip to maximize the chances that those donors would have an exciting and potentially inspiring time. They might be obvious things, but you managed to absolutely deliver on them and follow through on those principles. What were your guiding principles as you put that trip together?
Yeah, so I didn't know any of the donors beforehand. So the first thing was it was important for me to get to know them. So if I wasn't able to meet them face to face, we had phone conversations, we had a little email group. I also thought it was important for the donors to get to know each other as well. So I set up a group WhatsApp. So we were communicating months beforehand. The trip was in April time. So by actually this time last year, the WhatsApp group was set up. We had our email communications. Everyone had trust in me because they knew exactly the itinerary. I mean, if it's one thing that I am, it's organised. So they were in good hands. So already they felt safe and comfortable with me. And just showing that sort of like influence. You spoke about influence a lot, and really showing that gravitas and that you're in control, and this is an important trip, that we're going to make it extra special for you, and I'll be there for you to trust that everything will go well. And the follow up to that as well actually is that we still have our WhatsApp group. We met last week actually. We normally meet once a quarter now, so this is 2 quarters in, so we've met twice. We do a catch up. I'm also, luckily enough, we've got our captive animal welfare director based in the UK. So last week I organised for him to come down and meet us in London as well, and give a sort of like insider of what's going to be happening next year. And we'll continue that relationship now, even if they never donate to Animals Asia again, or they never attend a trip. We now have that special bond as donors, and I'll continue that.
Yeah, fantastic. So a couple of follow-up questions I've got. One of them is, I sense you're making lots of use of WhatsApp. Does that mean you've got various different WhatsApp groups for different bits of your Animals Asia workload, and you just manage to keep on top of each of those as and when appropriate? Or do you have any tips on how you manage to keep on top of all these different chunks of stewardship style communication?
Yeah, I have different groups for WhatsApp, because I just think it makes it more personal as well, and different people are funding different projects. So I would say that what I'm finding with a lot of my donors is they love text and WhatsApp communication. I'd maybe say that's number one, then email, then face-to-face and phone. And to be honest, a WhatsApp message takes 15 seconds to put together, and it's really easy to keep on top of it as well. And the thing is, it's not just me that's managing the group. You've got the people over in Asia who are so good at sending updates and pictures and videos. In a way, it starts to just run itself. It's not me running it at all. It's just like a WhatsApp group where everyone's contributing. So I would really highly recommend that for other major gifts managers.
Thank you. And then a follow-up question. You mentioned earlier the webinar you'd set up. Was how many, as an example, how many people did you get attending each of those webinars? And could you give us a couple of your tips or principles as you've managed to put together these 4 webinars for the next year? Anything you've learned or anything you're trying to do to make all the effort that's involved, especially for your colleague who's in service delivery, to make it really maximized because people are showing up for the webinar rather than your colleague over there having to do the webinar and only one person here attending?
Yeah, so for this webinar that we had in September, because it was the first one, I almost wanted to pilot it. So it was a very small group. It was only about 30 people on it. We can have a maximum of 100. And what I did is I wanted to make it as easy as possible for Heidi, who's in Vietnam. So I just asked if she could prepare a presentation for 60 minutes about a day in the life or a week in the life of the Vietnam Rescue Centre, because that's what people really want to know. A lot of our donors, 95% of them, will never visit the sanctuary. And I know that insider information is so valuable for them. So setting up the webinar, we had the sort of like rules beforehand so that everyone knew that they would be muted for the first hour so that Heidi could speak and there would be no interruptions. Because, you know, there's nothing worse on a webinar or a Skype call where it's back and forth. So we had 60 minutes where everyone was muted, but what they could do is they could have there was a Q&A box. So as they had a question that popped up, they could type in their Q&A, and I had my trust fundraiser on, managing that at the same time. And then once Heidi had finished speaking after an hour, we went through the questions. So 5 people had asked the same question. That was obviously the first question that was answered. And we had half an hour of going through the questions. And I was very aware that, you know, this was during the day. This could have been people's lunch times. We had 90 minutes and we had to finish on that time. So if any questions were left unanswered and we didn't have time, I took them away. We got an answer from Heidi and then I relayed it back to the donor. And everyone was happy. It was a real success. It worked really well.
So it was so successful that you've got to go ahead to quite deliberately do lots more of these and to make this a key part of the stewardship offering to people who are supporting your charity. So that's congratulations on the success of it. 2 questions. One, I presume that you sensed, apart from being really interesting and inspiring, it was helping the supporters belong and care and potentially want to be more generous. And then my other question is just really practically, was it relatively easy to get people signing up, or did you have to communicate quite regularly to get people signing up to the webinar?
So what I'd set up 2 emails and then 2 reminders. So what I did was, so it was due for mid-September. So in end of June, I sent out the first email with the registration link to explain to people to sign up. Then about a month later, I sent out the second one just as a reminder, because I was aware it was over summer holiday time and people might not be checking emails quite as regularly. But I must admit, the first email had the best response. Most people signed up straight away. And then we had 2 reminders, so just to let them know a week beforehand that the webinar was going ahead, and then a day beforehand to remember to do things like install Zoom, be ready to start at 1 p.m, how long it would last for, and the format as well. So everyone was well informed about what would be happening.
Yes, and I don't know if it was possible to measure how interesting and valuable they found it, or whether there was any measurement of how that has affected giving levels since.
So I was actually going to do a survey afterwards to see what the reaction was, but to be honest, I didn't have to, because 90% of the people emailed me personally to just say thank you so much for doing this, and you know, it was so valuable for us. There wasn't really a specific fundraising ask, so I can't really measure that at the minute, but that is something I'm looking to do in the future.
So I love this specific tactic, and I hope that there's many listeners, even if they are just UK based, so there's not a massive geographical reason to do this, but nevertheless, it's clearly you managed to get more people showing up for the webinar than we would necessarily get showing up for a project visit, whether in the UK or abroad. So I think it's a fabulous tactic. Thank you for explaining it. And then if we were to move on to, I know you mentioned the other day 2 or 3 other really interesting successes you've had, and I wonder if, could you tell me about 1 or 2 more of those, and indeed 1 or 2 more of the key principles from the Major Gifts Mastery Program that you found have helped?
Sure. So I think a big one for me is storytelling and the influence that storytelling has. And I must admit, I went away and I literally did a session about storytelling for all the UK staff in Animals Asia. And you do a really great exercise about telling a story, and then you've got to get it into 6 bullet points, 3 bullet points, 1 bullet point. And you could see that their face when they were having to tell a story in 1 sentence. But the results were amazing. You know, you think you can't do it, and the stories, we've actually collected a little story bank now that we're going to add to. So storytelling really has been a big one for me. And a couple of examples how it's worked was I had we had a little bear called Aurora that was rescued, and it was again super sad story. But we're not pulling on the heartstrings, as in, you know, like emotional blackmail or anything. It's just telling the story how it is. And I told this story to a mid-level donor, and she was just absolutely blown away by it. Used the techniques that you had shared, and again, she really just linked in with Aurora and wanted to help her and her little friends in the den. And she's another donor that's now moved from a mid-level donor to a major donor. And I also went a couple of weeks ago to meet a donor who is very much focused on the bear element of it. So I was giving her an update about the bears and the sanctuaries, and then I literally heard a story the day before about the elephants and how we were rescuing a couple of elephants and the story of it. And I was able to link it back with my time in Vietnam, seeing the elephants that we were rescuing. And I thought, I'm going to just tell her this story because it's important for people to know that, you know, we do other things at Animals Asia. It's not just the bears. And this lady, we were sitting in the middle of a hotel coffee bar, and she was just in floods of tears. She just said, I just didn't know you were doing this sort of work as well. How can I help? You know, I want to help the bears, but how can I help the elephants as well? And it was just a really powerful moment that I was just telling this story that I had heard, and it had seriously affected this lady and just really changed her outlook on our charity and what else that we can achieve.
It's so interesting, isn't it, how if we've worked in a charity for a little while, we can forget and underestimate the power of knowing the specifics, which very often we in the charity do know these specific examples, but because we've heard it 3 times before, we become a little just not quite appreciating just how strong and fascinating and powerful these concrete examples is. So when we're more proactive than we naturally might be to share those, you know, it's 20 times more valuable than us talking about the mission statement or whatever. So congratulations for being so confident in sharing those real examples. So there's so many great principles you've talked about so far, Lynda. That last one was storytelling and sharing real examples. Is there anything else that you found interesting from the program that you weren't necessarily doing at that level, but now the program helped you to deliberately do more of something?
Yeah, there's two other elements that really stick out for me. The first one is the magic formula, talking about the problem and impact. I wouldn't say too much about it because people should go on the course to learn about it. But I just remember you always gave this analogy of it's, you know, think about the horse and the cart. So the horse is the problem and why we're doing what we're doing. And the cart was the how. How do we solve it, and how do we show that, you know, for me, Animals Asia are the best at solving this problem. And I think before I attended your course, I was swapping the horse and cart round the other way. So that was a real big moment for me, and I still use that to this day. And of course, you can incorporate your storytelling into it. And the last thing that really hit home for me was you spoke a lot about influence and breaking the seal when you go in for meetings. And I had an example of this actually a couple of months ago, where I was going into a couple of major donor meetings with the CEO. The relationship very much with the CEO, I didn't know these people at all, not really even had email conversations or phone conversations with them. So I knew I had to really show gravitas and influence, and I wanted to take these relationships over. So you always said if you were going into a meeting and you wanted to break the seal, that to plan your point before you go in and say it as soon as you get into the meeting to show you've got presence, and really can add gravitas and value. And I did exactly that in the meeting, and it was so successful. I mean, I can now say that I absolutely hold those relationships now. I think also as well, like really believing in yourself as well. You know, you're the expert in the fundraising field here, and these relationships are going to be best suited with you. And that was a real thumbs up for me. I was so pleased after that meeting to really have those relationships, and some of them were actually lapsed, and I can now say that I'm stewarding them and they're no longer lapsed. They've now given, and hopefully will continue to give over the coming years.
Yeah, well, congratulations on managing to do that, Lynda, because it's not easy because of our own psychological reasons and little voice. And even if all of that is fine, the number of signals that we as a fundraiser can be sent by society or by those within our charity, that where we are in the pecking order compared to some of these extremely important and or high status and or wealthy people, it's not easy to go into the meeting feeling on an equal and willing and able to be proactive and own the space in that way. But of course, if we are to help a donor give to something they care about, at some level, they do need to see us on a level rather than look down on us. So congratulations on managing to make it work.
Thank you. Yeah, I was really pleased. I must admit, I was very pleased.
Yeah, and I know that particular one is I was first taught that tactic by our excellent colleague Charlie White, who's a fabulous coach, and you mentioned she was your coach. Coaching is an interesting thing because many people before they've done this program haven't had a coach, either an executive coach, a leadership coach, or a fundraising coach. So it's a slightly strange new way of working to get used to. Could you talk just briefly about how that worked for you, how you used those calls, or even a particular example of something that working with your Bright Spot coach Charlie helped you to make progress on?
Yeah, so I would normally go into the call with maybe like 3 points that I wanted to discuss and I would like some sort of feedback and advice on. And I remember at the time it was all to do with like tax effective giving and mid-value donors. That was my main focus during that summer of coaching calls. So I would go in with the 3 points, and the coaching is really, really interesting because you think you're going in to ask them for their advice, but what they actually do is they turn it round. So you actually give yourself the answer in the end, which is really, really interesting psychologically. But I just found them really invaluable, and to hear from the experience of Charlie as well. And and for the consolidation of the learning as well from what we had learned in the previous weeks as well, I thought the coaching calls really brought that together. So it was a really great addition to the training as well.
Yes, so many people find that is almost their favorite bit of the program, just because often fundraisers have good relationships with their managers, good relationships with their colleagues and all the rest of it, and yet often some conversations internally you're holding back somewhat, and or you're talking to someone who's not trained to coach in the style that you just said. So if they help at all, it's more of an advice style giving rather than the power of helping you really own a solution. So I'm so pleased that you managed to make the most of that.
I would also say, I'm still in contact with Charlie now. Whether it's through email or Twitter, or I've emailed her a couple of times for a little bit of advice about mid-value donors. So it doesn't mean that the relationship just has to stop there. Again, 15 months later, I'm still in contact with my coach.
Yes, it's again, surprise in fundraising, it's these relationships and these small things as much as the big one-off things, isn't it?
Yeah.
So one of my last questions, I guess, is coming on this program is a bit different from just going on a one-day course or a one-day conference. It's a little bit more complex. There's more to it. There's a little bit more investment you need to go and find, or persuade a colleague internally to find. If someone's listening to this or watching this and they're curious and but they're not quite decided whether it's worth the effort, what would you say to someone who's thinking about doing one of these programs?
Do it. I think all I have to say is my target this year was 595,000, and I'm going to bring in around £900,000. And a lot of these tactics that we've spoke about have been part, have brought that income in for myself and Animals Asia. It really has been invaluable. And I think as well, a lot of people just think about the training course and attending, you know, 5 days or however many days it is. It's much bigger than that. Like, as I said, the friends I made, the peer group I made, the coaching sessions, it really does all bring together. And I would say, if you can, absolutely attend the course. It's fantastic.
Thank you, Lynda. And I know you've got this time of year as busy as ever. You've got other things to do. So a huge thank you for giving up your time to share some of these examples and stories and principles of what's been working so well for you this year. I really appreciate your time.
Thank you so much. Thank you.
Thanks. Bye-bye.
Bye. Bye.